This presentation is going to look at the entire student instructional process, specifically at using the 3-term contingency to build skills. Here's a diagram of the instructional process. You can see your A, antecedent, B, behavior, and C, consequence. You can also see the P is for prompt, and we'll talk about that in a later presentation. The instructional process starts with the first piece of the 3-term contingency, the antecedent procedures. In the student instruction process, the antecedent procedures are asking or telling, demanding, or instructing. They usually begin with an SD. An SD is a discriminative stimulus, a stimulus that controls the probability of a response. Because responses have been reinforced in the presence of the discriminative stimulus and not in its absence, they tend to occur more often when the SD is present than when it's absent. To start our session, we want to make sure to be prepared. We're going to review the teaching procedures. We need to know what we need to say, what we need to do, what the student needs to say or do. We're going to make sure that we're equipped with our teacher materials. We've got our data sheet, our pencil. If there's a clicker or a timer necessary, we have those at hand too. We want to make sure also that we have our student materials prepared. If the program requires picture cards or certain items, maybe sorting containers, we have all those things at the ready. For the most part, preparation should happen prior to the student arrival as much as that's possible. So our targets that we're going to be working on that day and the prompts, if they're necessary, they need to be filled in on the data sheet prior to the start of the student's day. That's something that we need to do on administrative time and not on student instruction time. In the moment, preparation is going to be necessary sometimes. And so when that happens, we want to make sure that the student's actively engaged with an activity, either something that we've set them up with or maybe something that they enjoy doing. It's not really fair to expect our students to sit patiently and wait for us to gather all their materials. So if we do in the moment realize that we forgot something, we need to step up, we need to ask a question, we want to make sure that we allow our student to engage with an activity that they can engage actively with the entire time that we need that extra time for preparation. A big piece of the Competent Learner Model curriculum and what we do here is the motivating responding piece. So in order to make sure that we're motivating our students to respond, we want to make sure that we've built rapport with this particular student that we're working with. We want to make sure that we have adequate reinforcers in place and that we're prepared to give them immediately and on the appropriate schedule. We want to make sure that the learner is attending to us. So they're either looking at us, they're sitting calmly, they're not engaged with other items, they're not engaged in stereotypical behavior. The learner needs to look ready to learn. For different students, this is going to look like different things. We can't expect eye contact across the board, just like we can't expect sitting still and in a chair across the board. We want to ask the student what he or she would like to work for or offer some available options. What is the reward? What's the point in doing what we're about to ask them to do? And then to start our session, we're going to ask for a few easy tasks so that the student can contact some reinforcement. We want to save the big reinforcers for when they do the really tough stuff, though. When we go to issue that instruction, we want to think about it as setting the occasion for a response. So we need to know what our instruction is and to present it exactly as it's written. Are we going to say something? Are we going to do something? Are we going to present something? We want to present the instruction clearly, and we want to present it without including extraneous language. Listen to the following 2 examples. When I name a picture, you touch it. Versus, I'm going to pick a picture and ask you to touch it by saying its name. Then I want you to touch the picture I just named. Okay? Are you ready? Which one of those 2 was easier to understand? Hopefully you said the first one. When I name a picture, you touch it. It's clear and it's presented without extraneous language. We also want to make sure that we present the instruction one time. We want to refrain from repeating our directions without delivering a consequence. So if you ask a student to stand up and they don't stand up, rather than continuing to repeat, stand up, stand up, stand up, we want to go ahead and issue a consequence so that the student realizes that our words and our requests of them have value. Time for some active student responding. Which of the following is not an antecedent procedure? Motivating responding, issuing instruction, providing reinforcement, or reviewing teacher procedures. C, providing reinforcement. It's not an antecedent procedure, it's actually a consequence. We provide reinforcement following student behavior, not preceding it. The next piece is the student behavior piece, the B. Either a student behaves correctly or a student behaves incorrectly, and according to the program that we're trying to teach. For a correct student response, it means that the student responded correctly. They may have to adhere to time restrictions if that's applicable. So a correct student response might mean that the student responded correctly within 3 seconds. It's possible that we implement some restrictions around how the student is able to say something. So maybe a student needs to respond intelligibly if it's applicable to them. So we only want to accept the learner's highest quality of response. If a learner has said cookie before and we know that he or she can say cookie, it means we no longer accept them just saying k or k. And the response is free from other problem behavior. This part's really important. A correct response means that the student does not scroll through responses and that they don't engage in stereotypical behavior during or after the response. If our students engage in a correct response, we want to mark a plus on the data sheet. An incorrect student response means that the student responds in a way that is inconsistent with a correct response. So either they scroll, so maybe you ask them, what flies in the sky? And the student says, cat, dog, bird. They might displace materials, throw picture cards, throw other objects. Their response might be significantly delayed, so maybe you ask them to do something and then it takes them 12 seconds to do it when they need to respond within 3 seconds. Or the response is just incorrect. So you ask a student, what does a cow say? And they say neigh. In that instance, you want to mark a minus on the data sheet. Another option, of course, is that there's a total lack of student response. So the learner does not respond to the teacher instruction, or the learner engages in stereotypical behavior following the instruction. In this case, we want to score a minus on the data sheet. But what we need to recognize is that something's missing from our antecedent procedures. Did we gain the learner's attention? Were they motivated to respond? Were they allowed to choose what they were working for? This would indicate to us that there's something that we didn't do in that A portion, and we need to go back and think about those pieces. The last piece is the consequence procedures. For correct responses, our learner gets a correct answer or responds correctly, there are a couple things we need to do. We're going to either utilize a continuous schedule of reinforcement, which is used to establish new behavior, an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, which is used to maintain or strengthen behavior, and we also need to think about the size. So big reinforcers for big behaviors. Things our student has to work really hard to do, we want to make sure that it's worth it to them. The size of the reinforcement is directly correlated with the learner's effort. Our reinforcement need to be immediate. Reinforcement should immediately follow the correct behavior. Keep in mind, a reinforcer by definition reinforces the behavior it follows. Be careful what that is. And reinforcement needs to be contingent, meaning that it's only given for correct responses. It's not given for any other behavior or at any other time. Consequences for incorrect responses. So your learner got a wrong answer or responded incorrectly. Now what? Now we're going to go into an error correction procedure. We have a separate training on the error correction procedure, so we're going to skip over that part for right now. Some examples that you'll observe in the classroom. We're going to look at our repertoire. So for example, the observe or imitate programs. Our SD is usually do this, and the behavior we expect is usually that the learner copies the teacher behavior. For writer, our SD is usually something like make one like mine, and we expect that the student will copy the teacher's stroke. If we're running listen or adhere to programs, our SD might be stand up and jump, and we expect that the learner stands and jumps. For our sort program, we might tell the learner car, put it where it goes, while showing them a picture of a car. We would expect the learner to put the picture of the car with the other cars. And for our listener touch programs, our SD could be something like, when I name a picture, you touch it, dog. We would expect that the learner then touches the picture of the dog. Active student responding. Do this, put it where it goes, make one like mine. They're all examples of A, consequences for incorrect behavior, B, prompts, C, SDs, D, error corrections. All of those phrases are examples of SDs, or discriminative stimulus. Another ASR, true or false. If my learner doesn't respond to me, it's his or her fault. They don't know the answer. Hopefully you quickly answered false for this one. If your learner doesn't respond to you, it's not their fault, it's your fault, it's my fault. I didn't gain the learner's attention prior to issuing the instruction. I need to think about how I can better rearrange the environment or motivate my learner to respond. Remember, we got to go back to those antecedent procedures, those things that we need to put in place ahead of time to give the student the best chance at responding correctly. Some things to remember. We need to remember our ABCs. We also need to remember that consequences impact the behavior that they follow, so we have to be planful. For example, if we ask a learner, what does a cow say? And he or she says moo, and then it takes us 5 minutes to get them the iPad, and in that 5 minutes, the student decides to write on the table with a marker that's close by. The consequence of providing the iPad, if it follows the writing on the table, is likely going to reinforce writing on the table and not responding to our question. We have to make sure that we're being planful with when we deliver reinforcers. We also need to remember that if more time is spent in the A, so if more time is spent motivating, responding, gaining attention, then less time will be needed to spend in the C, correcting student errors.